Components in Chinese characters are usually placed in a predictable way, so if you remember the components, you can write the character. But not always. Some characters share components, but differ only in how they are arranged. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about Chinese characters that share the same components, but mean different things depending then on how these components are arranged. To illustrate what I mean, we can look at a simple example. We have the character Mang, which means busy, and we have the character Wang, which means to forget. They both share the same components, so in Mang, the heart is on the left, and in Wang, it's at the bottom. And then they also share the character component Wang, which means to die, and in Mang then, this component is on the right, whereas in Wang, to forget, it's at the top. Before moving on, I should mention that we will be talking about characters here, and this is an audio-only podcast, but there is a written article on Hacking Chinese that contains all the examples if you want to look them up later, or if you simply prefer to read. I should also say that this discussion is not very beginner-friendly in general, not because this doesn't occur with common characters, because it does. I mean, the example characters I brought up, Mang and Wang, are both very common and something you will encounter as a beginner. The phenomenon itself is quite rare though, and there are many more basic strategies you should employ before listening to my advice in this article. For example, it's absolutely crucial to understand how Chinese characters work in general, and this is going to boost your learning a lot. And if you are new to Chinese characters, you can check out my series of articles starting with The Building Blocks of Chinese, Part 1, Chinese Characters and Words in a Nutshell. As usual, I put links to all these articles and podcast episodes in the show notes. Another thing you can do is to use mnemonics or clever memory techniques to remember tricky characters. So for example, if you mix up Mang and Wang, you can create a mnemonic for that. And that is something we will talk about later in this article. Another approach to vocabulary that can help you immensely is flashcards and spaced repetition software, which I've also written about before, so I'll put links in the show notes. I want to bring these things up here because what we're going to talk about in this episode is really what happens when these fail in different regards. So for example, when we create mnemonics to remember characters, these rarely include the order of the characters, like which character component is supposed to go at the top and bottom, left, right, and so on. This is because most of the time this is superfluous information, it's just extra effort to try to encode this in your mnemonic. Because if you understand how Chinese characters work and you've seen a few characters, you can usually figure this out either by logic, because most characters are structured in a certain way, or simply because it looks weird because you've seen the character enough times to know that it's supposed to be on the left and not at the top, or something like that. If you want more general guidance, I also suggest you check out my article, My Best Advice on How to Learn Chinese Characters, where I summarize everything I've written about Chinese characters. If you want to listen to the podcast episode, it's episode 74. So when I say that understanding the Chinese writing system helps, I don't just mean that you understand that there are components and these components have functions and they are then combined into compounds most of the time. I mean, there are characters that are not compounds, but a vast majority of Chinese characters are compounds. When you've seen the same components a number of times in different characters, you are likely to start noticing some very strong patterns, at least for some of the components. So for example, if I tell you that a character contains the component cao, meaning grass, you can be relatively sure that this character will go at the top and that it will be the one that looks like two plus signs. This is because this character component almost always appears at the top, and we have it in many common characters, most notably hua, meaning flower. It's also in the name of many flowers and many plants, and then this cao is always at the top. You've probably noticed other similar patterns, such as shou, hand, usually being on the left. We also have water in the 3 drops form, also on the left, and many vertical forms of characters that appear on the left. My point here is that when you've seen these characters a few times, maybe written them yourself, you won't really think that da, as in to hit somebody or something, will have the hand component somewhere else other than on the left, because it just looks really weird. There are of course characters that have a hand somewhere else than on the left, but not that one. But mixing these up I think is highly unlikely and not something I've ever done, and I haven't heard many students complain about it either. We do have some components that don't really follow any kind of rule, where it might be necessary to include the position in a mnemonic if you use mnemonics, or where you have to pay attention to this in order to not get it wrong. The best example I can think of is niao, bird, which appears in many bird names or other characters related to birds. This component can appear on the right, as in goose, or ge, pigeon, or ya, duck. So here the component then is on the right. But it can also appear at the bottom, such as in ying, eagle, or in any of the two characters for Mandarin duck, so yuan and yang. And finally, it can also appear on the left, as in to, ostrich. So you can't really know where the niao is supposed to go, so if I just tell you that this character is niao plus something else, you really need to know what this something else is, and if it's supposed to go on the left, right, or bottom. There's another notable case that I want to mention. We have two components which are completely different but look exactly the same in modern Chinese. This is the component that looks like an ear, and that's also what it's called in colloquial Mandarin. And when it appears on the right, it is the character yi, which means city or settlement. When it appears on the left, however, it's fu, which means mound or hill. This is a good example of when it's extremely useful to know the meaning of the components in a compound, because if you know it's city or hill, you know if it's on the left or right, and if you include this information in your mnemonic, or if you just pay attention to it when learning, you can then remember which side it's supposed to be on. Before we get to different characters that share exactly the same components but differ only in how they are arranged, I want to mention a case that kept trolling me for a long time, and I just thought I forgot which order it was supposed to be written in, and it turned out that both were right according to different standards. This is the character go, meaning enough, and when written in simplified Chinese, the duo in this character is written on the right, but in traditional Chinese, the duo is written on the left, so the same components, they are just reversed in terms of order. This is still the same character though, it's just a variant, it means the same thing, it's pronounced the same way, and so on. But what we're going to look at now are characters that have the same components in different order then, but mean different things, and they are usually also pronounced differently. They are essentially two completely different characters, they just happen to share the same components. So in the written article, I've listed all the cases I've been able to find and that other people have helped me find in the comments to this article on Hacking Chinese, but I don't think it makes sense to just read through this list. Some of these characters are rather rare, and the likelihood is that you as a listener might not have learnt it, or that it needs a lot more context for me to explain which character I refer to, and it's easier to just look at the list. So instead of reading through it, I will select a few examples. One of the most common ones is probably Mang, busy, versus Wang, to forget, as I mentioned earlier. But there are a few other common ones too. For example, we have Wei, meaning only, which has a ko, a mouth, and then a Dui, which is a kind of bird. But then we also have Shou, which means to sell, which has the bird at the top and the ko at the bottom. We also have Dai, meaning stupid or dull, and Xing, meaning almond. And the first one is written with a ko at the top, and then a tree below that, and the other one is the same, except the order is reversed. The final one I want to mention here, because I remember struggling with this one a lot before I realized that both characters actually exist. And this is mo, meaning caress or touch, and mo, meaning to copy or trace. They both share the same components then, so it's hand, shou, and then no or nothing, mo. In to touch or feel, the hand is on the left and the know nothing is on the right, but in to copy trace, the know nothing is at the top and the hand is on the bottom. And I think I got these characters wrong a dozen times at least before I figured out that they are actually different characters, it's just that they share the same components. Your experience of this phenomenon might differ from mine, of course. Maybe you think this case is very easy, but something else might have been tricking you up. So check the list on Hacking Chinese for the full details. So far, we've only talked about pairs of components that are arranged differently and thus generate different characters, but there are also a few triplets where we have 3 different characters sharing exactly the same components, but then, of course, arranged differently. One of them appears in the cover image of this episode, so check there if you want to know what I'm talking about. All 3 characters contain the component li, meaning to stand, and yu, meaning feathers. The first character with yu on the left is la, flying, and this is quite rare, so if you haven't learned it, don't worry and don't bother with it. Then we have yi, which means to assist or help, and this is the opposite of the other one, so we have li on the left and then the yu on the right. But then we also have i, so same pronunciation again, but now we have the feathers at the top and the li at the bottom, and this means daybreak or the following day. So all these three characters share exactly the same components, they're just arranged differently. There is another case I want to mention here, because two of the characters are really common, and that is ling, meaning another, where we have a ko, a mouth at the top, and then li, force at the bottom. But then we also have jia, to add, which has the same components then, but the li is on the left and the ko is on the right. Now, this is in the triplet section, so we actually also have a much rarer character, le, which is usually used only for transcriptions. And this is the reverse of jia, so it has the ko on the left and the li on the right. Like I said, if you didn't know some of these characters, don't go and learn them. I just brought them up here because I find this interesting, and some of these cases might have been trolling you or tripping up your character recall. So how do you deal with this phenomenon as a student? Well, in most cases, you don't need to do anything because this phenomenon is quite rare, and when it does occur, it's usually the case that one of the characters is quite common and the other one is super rare, so you're not likely to mix them up. Of course, you might forget how to write the common one, but it's not the case that you will learn both roughly at the same time and then mix them up. Even when the components are the same and both characters are reasonably common, it's still not likely that you will mix them up. For example, even though mang, busy, and wang, to forget, do share the same components, I've never mixed these characters up for some reason. In fact, this pair, which is probably the most common one on the list, is something that somebody else in the comments suggested to me, and otherwise I wouldn't have noticed that it even existed. This doesn't mean you've never mixed them up and we're all different as students, so I'm not saying that this will never happen, I'm just saying that most of the time you still don't need to do anything. If you find yourself mixing up the order of the components, such as if you forget where the niao is supposed to go in different types of bird, or if you do mix up mang and wang, well, then I think you can create a simple mnemonic that includes this information. To illustrate this, we can take the character pair that I mentioned earlier, so we have dai, meaning dull, stupid, and xing, meaning almond. So to remember which is which, you can think of a fool sitting with his mouth wide open in the top of a tree, which would then be dai. And for almond, xing, you do the opposite. You have a tree and you put someone lying on their backs under the tree with their mouths open and almonds falling into their mouths, maybe to the point of overflowing or discomfort or something else. As I argued in episode 229, don't use mnemonics for everything when learning Chinese. Don't create these mnemonics just because you can. Wait until you mix them up or you notice there's a problem. You fail to remember something you think you should remember, then you create a mnemonic. Don't overdo it and make a problem out of something that actually isn't a problem. This means it's time to wrap up this episode. I hope you found it interesting and maybe I've helped you clear out some cases that you've been mixing up. But like I said, most of the time you just need to know which the components are, and if you know a lot about Chinese characters and you've read a fair amount, you just know where the components go. But as we have seen, this is not always the case. Sometimes we do have many characters that share exactly the same components, and they only differ in how they are arranged. For the full list of characters, please head over to the written article on Hacking Chinese, and if I've missed a character pair here or even a triplet, please let me know so I can expand it. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.